are things in this world that are really weird.
Hi, I'm Dr. Laura.
And I'm Matthew.
And this is We Changed Our Minds podcast. And I think it's helpful before we get started, just as a friendly reminder, that the materials and contents of this podcast are presented for educational and informational purposes only. So the materials and contents are not medical, psychological, legal, or other professional advice, and they're not intended to be substituted for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. So if you have any specific questions about your health or healthcare decisions, please seek the advice of a licensed healthcare professional.
One of the principles was that they talked about. One thing was that if we get enough people to take LSD, and we don't need everyone, we just need enough, sort of to tip the scale, enough people to take LSD, go to a Grateful Dead concert show, and listen to the music. Then it's a Bear's concept, and Phil worked it out. They worked it out together. We're gonna have a sound system that's gonna be so magnificent that it will bring them in. Plus, we're gonna have monitors on the stage. There were no monitors before Bear decided that the musicians had to hear themselves. That if they couldn't hear themselves, the feedback loop, they used to talk about this feedback loop and an amoeboid shape. They, they get locked into it, that it would be it, and they needed certain requirements in order for this to happen. And one was pure LSD.
Okay.
The other was the Grateful Dead. And the third was the sound system and an audience. These are the ingredients
of planetary change, huh?
Exactly. And they planned it. It wasn't random. And then the other principle they came up was inclusion rather than exclusion. We want you to be part of it. Oh, hi, come on in. Not, ooh, I don't like the way you look, bye-bye. None of that. We're including people.
Hey, now we changed our minds, people. This is Matthew coming at you. Episode 3, second season. Here we are. It's so good to be back. Yeah, Laura and I really took a extended break there after the first season. And we missed y'all. We missed this project. It's become just a real passion, a real labor of love. It touches on so many of the things that I enjoy in life. For this season, we've got a new format coming, along with an audio. There's going to be this visual presentation that you can find here on YouTube. That's going to tell more of the story of our guests and our purpose and our interests, and it's just a wonderful outlet for me creatively. All the design and the archival footage and the music. Of course, the music is a steady staple here. We changed our minds. It's great to be back. And we've got a lot of interesting ideas for everybody this coming season. Already got some great interviews lined up. We'll leave some of those as a surprise. Next week, you're in for a treat because we have my sit down with Roni Stanley as the partner, lab mate, mother to the child from Augustus Owsley Stanley III, the legendary clandestine LSD chemist and sound pioneer, also known as Bear. Which brings me to the opening segment of tonight's episode, which was a little snippet from that talk I had with Roni. Bear and Phil's, their whole plan and strategy to turn on the whole world. I get where they're coming from. I certainly felt that way when I was going to shows. That if that experience that we were all having could spread far and wide, that it would change the planet. Alas. So tonight, I bring to you my talk with Dennis McNally. And for those of you who haven't heard, Dennis is a historian. He is an author, perhaps best known for his definitive book, Desolate Angel, about the life of Jack Kerouac. You could even call Dennis a beat historian, among other things. Certainly a counterculture historian. Dennis also authored a well-known book on the Grateful Dead and was the publicist for the band. I believe Jerry hired him in 84, 83, sometime around then, where he served faithfully at his post as publicist for the band all through the rest of the 80s, up until 95, when the band dissolved, and then stayed on board, representing the organization and working for the various offshoot projects, Rat Dog, other ones, etc. That's a long stretch, and he's seen a lot. That's one of the reasons I wanted to invite him to come on. These days, Dennis still works for various musicians and bands. He still has his foot in the music industry. And he lives with his wife and his longtime partner, Susanna Millman, in San Francisco. I had the idea to sit down with Dennis to really kind of explore with him some of these topics that we hold near and dear here. We Changed Our Minds. Primarily his observations of the various peaks and valleys and costs and benefits of substance use, as well as substance abuse. Now you can imagine, as a publicist in the Grateful Dead, Dennis had a front row, ringside seat to the inner workings of the band and its members, as well as the larger scene that surrounded the band. You know, Dennis was there for all the ups and downs in the later era of the Grateful Dead, and he brings a really fascinating perspective, I thought. I mean, some of the things that really touched me about Dennis and my talk with him was, you know, how balanced he struck me coming out the other side of his run with drugs and alcohol, largely being limited to a little bit of red wine and a tiny bit of cannabis these days. His main thing is meditation. He clearly had his run with psychedelics, hundreds of trips by his own assessment, as well as a row with cocaine in the 80s. But he was able to walk away from all that without causing widespread damage into his life and relationships. So Dennis has a good head about him. And from that good head, he was witness to the various challenges of fame, the gruelingness of the road on tour, the isolation that fame and touring brings, most particularly upon Garcia. And in tonight's talk, Dennis really brought some light to his view on this man, Jerry Garcia. The dynamics, emotionally and personally, that were in part fuel for his addiction to heroin. The initial pressures creatively and financially that catalyzed Jerry getting involved with heroin, with Persian heroin, as he says, and continued to plague him throughout the rest of his life. Something he said about Jerry in this that really struck me, that was very poignant, was if it was up to Jerry, he would be Huck Finn on a raft with a banjo and a pretty girl in a joint. I think that said a lot about that man and where his joy was. In a lot of ways, he became a prisoner of the very freedom that he pursued in his music and his expression. In tonight's talk, I also continue to pursue this question that I've been pondering a lot lately, and I like to bounce off people who've had some perspective. It's trying to better understand this path of psychedelic use that for many leads into hard drug use, hard drug experimentation, and eventual addiction. It's kind of a perplexing, paradoxical kind of thing that I've seen befall many in the psychedelic community. One would think that if the insights and the self-awareness and the growth catalyzed by, sincerely partake in psychedelic experiences, that it would leave individuals with, I would say, even more fortified, healthy, intact, and robust sense of personal regard and care for their health, and all the wiser for life choices going forward. However, that's sometimes not the case, and you see individuals who have touched upon very expanded states of mind and heart open that door to some of the more, some of the darker, more treacherous drugs out there, and are befallen by addiction, and unfortunately sometimes even death. My theory about that, for many, is the openings, the removing of veils that psychedelics can provide, if not undertaken well and not properly integrated, if not carefully fortified by other spiritual and personal practices that help one ground and integrate, it can leave a person perhaps unbearably raw to the complexities, the tragedies, the contradictions that make up so much of life. When I was a kid, when I was 14, 15, first turning on to psychedelics, these barriers of mind, these perceptual doors that stood between myself and the experience of the universe in its raw state, I saw as obstacles. I saw them as, hang-ups and blocks to be melted down and done away with, to be vaporized totally so that my mind and soul could be set free. And I went about that with great diligence. Now, in middle age, looking back, reflecting on all of that, I see those perceptual doors differently. Although I don't regret my journeys and my choices, and I do feel, in large, greatly served by them and a better person for those experiences. If I could go back and speak to myself at that age, as that young man looking to turn on, so enthusiastic about getting outside of his mind, sit him down and say, hey man, I think that's beautiful what you're doing. I think it's beautiful that you want to know true spiritual love and that you want to experience and commune with the universe in its unbridled glory, and that you want your soul and mind to be free. Don't lose that, kid, and follow it all the way. The keys to do so are available, and if you wish, there they are. However, consider that these doors of perception, these obstacles of mind, perhaps in some ways are gifts to us Because if you open your heart, if you blow your heart wide open, and you remove all those barriers between yourself and the raw universe, it can be a very difficult world. It can be, at times, unbearably tragic and intense mixture of light and dark that masquerades about in the world of material and duality. And while in many regards these medicines and these transcendent transpersonal experiences can become sources for a deepened understanding, a broadened sense of how all the pieces fit together, it can also leave one feeling more alienated, more set apart, and lost in a world filled with so many heartbreaks and such often blatant disregard for the sanctity of life. So journey on boldly, but guard that heart and guard that mind and pace yourself. Don't rend yourself naked too soon before you've developed within yourself the strength of wisdom so that you could be a vessel strong enough and wide enough to hold all of those various triumphs and tragedies that are life. And I feel perhaps some blew themselves open, too soon and too far, and their skin, per se, became too thin to comfortably live a life as a human and get on with their incarnation. And in those cases, I feel some do turn to those drugs that are more known for putting a thicker skin back on, providing that little bit of distance and comfort, detachment from the rawness of life. Just a theory. It's a question that I will continue to explore here on We Changed Our Minds with you all. So, thanks for coming along. And if any of you ever have any thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, you know the number, folks. 1-833 I am too high. 24/7 toll free. Leave us a message and we will get to it and possibly play your question on the next program. So with that, we're going to jump right into my conversation with Dennis. We start right in the meat of it, talking about the blatant and rampant, unprecedented hard drug problem sweeping the San Francisco Bay Area and so many American cities right now. Dennis and I both talk about how almost in disbelief we are walking around the streets at the open hard drug use and the human fallout in just plain view. So it's a bit of a quandary of our time. If you stick around to the very end, Dennis shares with us a story from his days touring with the band that is an especially important, very little known harm reduction factoid. Just in case some of you won't make it to the end, I feel like it's important to share this here now. One evening at a show, Dennis got, shall we say, mysteriously dosed backstage. And being a working man who took his functions for the band very seriously, he found himself in a bit of a quandary, where he was suddenly too high to properly execute his functions. So, looking for some help, he asked around to the road crew, and old Ramrod, rest in peace, turned Dennis on to a few tablets of niacin. Now, for those of you who don't know, niacin is a commonly available over-the-counter form of B vitamin. But what isn't known, or what I had never heard until this evening, was niacin, when taken during an active LSD experience, will effectively flush out or cancel the effects of the LSD rather rapidly. Now, this is incredible. This is something I've never heard spoken of anywhere. And Dennis, thank you for sharing this. This is something that people should know. So niacin is such an easily available tool that anybody out there who was a LSD enthusiast would be served to have some available. Have a couple emergency tablets on you in case things ever got unmanageably rough, or there's someone else who was having an experience that really needed a way out quickly. So thanks for that, Dennis. Tonight's musical guests are recommendations directly from Dennis in our talk. He mentioned 2 artists and songs I hadn't ever heard of. We have a little number by Peggy Lee from the early 1960s called Is That All There Is? And Phil Oakes, But For Fortune Go I think you enjoy. And we will see you back here next episode with Roni Stanley. So, get comfortable, turn on, and come. Change your minds with us.
Most people insist on listening to rock music at -3 decibels, when it was actually intended as a physical assault. In live performance, and at its most advanced, rock is intended to attack the eye as much as it does the ear. Experiments using the full paraphernalia of light and sound are only beginning. With 1 or 2 exceptions, they have been mostly ignored by the traditional arts, theatre, ballet, painting, but relished by rock new art of tomorrow.
Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friend, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball. If that's all there is.
You could call it a new prevalence of coping strategies a lot of people were using substance for in that time, and many of them being problematic. I mean, the drug world is very complex these days. I'm sure you've noticed.
The root of all drug abuse has been basically as a coping strategy.
That's right. And isolation.
I had the somewhat horrific experience of walking almost 100 yards, something, a substantial distance, not miles, but down a pathway, a sidewalk in San Francisco between where I had parked and the farmer's market. And in the course of that, passed at least 50 people smoking, whether it was fentanyl or crack or whatever, some or purge or whatever it was, but smoking something on aluminum foil,
Yeah.
And it's astonishing to see it in public. I mean,
Yeah.
Remember when we were scared about getting arrested for pot?
For smoking a joint. Yeah, man.
And it was just, but it's certainly difficult for me to summon up any big moral outrage about somebody doing anything to endure living on the street. I mean, sorry.
Yeah.
It's beyond my. You know the song by Phil Oakes called "There But for Fortune"?
No, sir, I don't.
seriously, Google it, YouTube, whatever.
Okay, got it.
But it's, it's like basically see that homeless. The phrase wasn't homeless. This is literally from the mid '60s. But the chorus is "There, but for fortune, go you or I," and it's powerful.
What that made me think of is, really we're all just a few, or one big event from being in a similar position.
I am not young, and nor is my wife, and we have a home, which is theoretically worth a lot of money because it's in San Francisco, and one catastrophic illness with this American medical system, and God only knows.
I know.
So yes,
that's an important realization.
Closer than we think.
For the, great empathy in my heart, when I frame it that way. And I had a saying I came up with during the pandemic, which was, we all get a hall pass. As long as you're not hurting anybody, whatever gets you through, we'll work it out on the other side. You know what I mean? Because, fuck, man, it was a challenging one, and it puts an interesting spin on just contemporary drug use. I was aware of your work with the Grateful Dead and your unique ringside view on counterculture. I'm aware of your interest in the Beat generation and your work studying Kerouac as a historian, and then the ringside seat you had for both the happenings within the band and the general scene all through the 90s and into the 2000s. And one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast is both be record keepers for the evolution of American counterculture, and also have an ongoing study and commentary on the evolution of drug use as it relates to the counterculture and creativity and its ongoing evolution. And that includes both psychedelics and also, having honest dialogues about all manners of drugs. I felt like you would probably have a unique insights and observations that you gathered over the years in both what you saw up close in the Grateful Dead scene, your own personal experiences, and your view is in a larger context as a historian. Bring us back to your introduction to psychedelics and the initial influence that they had upon your life path moving forward. Because my understanding is it was in the early 70s you had your first experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, at my first Grateful Dead concert.
Quite a combination.
So I graduated college in '71. And started going to University of Massachusetts at Amherst in graduate school in history, and connected with a guy who was a Deadhead, and literally who had obviously a major influence on my life in that. So one night, we were both very good graduate students, which meant we were masochistic, overworkers, working about 17, 18 hours a day, grabbing a little sleep, and then getting up and doing it again. And one of the reasons we hung out was that he was the only person I knew in the building who smoked pot, and he was, and I had zero money. I mean, zero. And one time I apologized because I couldn't contribute. He was getting me stoned, and I couldn't contribute. And his response, which was so lovely, was, "Hey, listen, man, if it sounds like I'm imitating Jerry, he was a New Yorker, and there's something about it that's very similar. Hey, listen, man, dope is like manure. It only does some good when it's spread around." And he that's how I got high until the second semester when I got a job. Anyway. His name was Chris. He was a genius mathematician, and ended up being the dean of School of Engineering at Washington University in St. Louis, a very respectable school. He's since passed. But anyway, and I was talking about I wanted to sort of get in control of my destiny academically by picking a dissertation topic in advance instead of after, where you sort of get told what you're going to do. And I said, maybe I'll do the Beats. And he said, no, you should do Kerouac, because his papers are at Columbia, which was mostly true, or at that time. and you can stay with my friends in the Bronx. So having a free place to stay in New York on the subway line was beyond gold. And coincidentally, my parents had just moved 20 miles away from where Kerouac was from.
Okay.
So the universe was whispering in my ear, well, this is an idea.
Circumstance was beckoning, yeah.
Long story short, I started working on that. I might add, those guys in the Bronx are among my closest friends to this day. So that was in like January or February. I didn't write it down and I didn't keep a journal. In October, Chris took me to my first Grateful Dead show. We had been listening to, I was hanging out in his room getting high, and he of course was, as a Deadhead, played nothing but Grateful Dead with the Hot Tuna exception. I might add that this is so far back that this was records, not tapes. Nobody had tapes in 72. So then he took me to my first show at Springfield Civic Center. And when we got there, he said, open your mouth. And I had a simply marvelous time. I might add that the show was, thank God for me, it was only about 2/3 sold. So as a result, there were empty seats very near the stage. And I enjoyed thoroughly the trip, but it sort of took my legs out from it. I mean, I wanted to sit down. And I found this great seat right next to the stage, to the side, but, they had speakers that filled the side, so that I was getting good sound. And, it's not as though there's this fantastic visual show going on you got to watch. Had a perfectly wonderful time, and that was my first acid trip, and I experimented substantially with it, not just at shows, but and also at all the shows I went to, really for the rest of the 70s and into the 80s until I became an employee.
Okay.
When I became a Grateful Dead employee in '84, I had to stop taking acid because I was at work. I really, I just, I couldn't do it anymore. Which I then eventually, long story short, when I left the Grateful Dead, which was left as in stopped being employed, which was in 2008. I had been working for Bob Weir for 4 years, and he started a band with Phil Lesh called Further, and Phil decided that the people that had been working with Bobby didn't fit with him, and that included me, like management. And I was sort of not a management. I was mid-level, shall we say, as the publicist for Rat Dog, and so I got laid off. Okay. And in the wake of that, on that classic old shibboleth about one door opens, one door closes, another door opens. Yes, I, for once in my life, actually sat down with my wife and said, "Okay, this, and I was anticipating. I mean, I've been intimately part of the Grateful Dead scene at that point for almost 30 years. I mean, intimately, as in working at the office and so forth since 1980. Yeah. I was expecting it to be much bigger a transition, frankly, than it was. I mean, I thought I'd be depressed and upset, and I wasn't all that much. Okay. To observe, I theorize, I think this is a pretty close to universal experience. Certainly the fundamental experience that I got out of metaphysical conclusion to pump it up a little.
Yeah.
Was simply that all is one, that everything is interconnected, and which, as I am writing in my current book, is a conclusion that the most sober Buddhist that ever was would agree with. The rest was just, fascination, and I've read a great deal of the psychedelic literature, and went
Yeah.
But this sense of interconnectedness. I had read a lot about Buddhism and Zen when I worked on the Kerouac book in the 70s.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I even visited the San Francisco Zen Center in the 70s to research it because a guy who knew Kerouac lived there. But I had, I got busy.
Okay.
And didn't follow up. I sort of intellectually said I thought of myself as a Zen person, but
Did you? Okay. Did you have a practice in your life?
no,
Okay.
I had no practice. So, and this is now 2008. We said, well, there's the San Francisco Zen Center, 10 minutes away from home, and I've been part of that ever since.
Wonderful.
And I took formal vows it's called the Jukai. I don't know, in 2010, 2011, something like that. The affinity between Zen and the psychedelic experience for me it's all one.
Okay.
So the single greatest confirmation for me of Buddhism was the psychedelic experience. Zen teachers, well, one of the vows that you make when you formally profess Zen, at least at San Francisco Zen Center, is not to intoxicate, and I would have to assume that LSD would be considered an intoxicant.
At least traditionally, yeah.
I still might, and I still drink wine, so I interpret this to suit myself.
Right.
But as I say, for me, I'm very comfortable with both. And I might add, I haven't done acid in 20 years anyway.
Is that right? Okay.
To quote Bob Weir, who stopped intentionally doing LSD, I think in 1966. Slogan was, "I've seen the elephant. I've done it, and I've gotten out of it what I can." And I'm sure he's was happy to have done it, but felt no further need.
Interesting.
And that's certainly where I'm
And when I was 12 years old, my daddy took me to the circus. Greatest show on earth. There were clowns and elephants and dancing bears. And a beautiful lady in pink tights flew high above our heads. But as I sat there watching, I had the feeling that something was missing. I don't know what, but when it was all over, I said to myself, is that all there is to the circus? Is that all there is?
My drug use now is red wine and a very little bit of pot.
Yeah, I understand that. I had the pleasure of we had Bobby on we talked to him for the show some episodes back, and I asked him if you could summarize your takeaway from your psychedelic experiences, what would it be? And I'll never forget it. He said, "Try to be ready for anything."
Well, considering he's an improvisational musician,
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
indeed. Yeah, and it's a general thirst for adventure, and curveballs that challenge approaches,
That also describes his sense of humor,
Indeed.
which is nothing but curveballs.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I really relate to everything you just said. And, an interesting observation I've made, in the counterculture is for a lot of people who turn on in a way that really influences their value structure and their life forward and their, basically the integration of that awareness of oneness into how you live your life on a daily level and interact with others is, more often than not, there seems to be, if they stay in that drug scene, many do get involved in what we traditionally consider hard drugs, drugs that more modulate energy, create, buffers of distance and comfort. And I was curious, what your thoughts on that are. I mean, I'm assuming you noticed that phenomenon around you.
I had my cocaine years, and when I first started working for the band, I was doing cocaine, and if I could rewrite my life, I don't have the deep regrets.
Yes, sir.
Thank God I never wrecked a car or hit somebody.
Yeah.
Did yell at a few people. That was the crew influence. The crew yelled at everybody, and so there was like permission to yell at people at shows. And there were 2 or 3 times when I was like, "Why did I?" But
not too bad, all in all.
I mean, if I could, rewrite history, then I, would be just as pleased never to have done blow.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, I don't have the deep kind of regrets that I didn't I didn't sacrifice a fortune, and I didn't hurt anybody. I don't, other than perhaps people around me just by being inaccessible. But
yeah.
At any rate,
Well played.
It is, I mean, I might add that, obviously the issue that comes up constantly amongst deadheads when they meet me, and I've had them literally say, "Why didn't you stop Jerry from doing drugs?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Have you ever had a friend who was addicted to drugs?"
Yeah.
And they go, "Yeah." And how accessible were they to your begging, pleading, ordering, freaking, whatever, to them about drugs? How much success did you have?
Mm-hmm.
Well, multiply that times 100, because Jerry Garcia, to quote, he said something in his usual inimitable fashion, said it was about his daughters, and what the hell? Now I can't remember the quote, but it was to the effect of that if they tried to get him to change his mind about anything, not necessarily about drugs, if he had decided seriously that that was the way it was going to be, the odds of influencing him were somewhat limited, shall we say?
To put it mildly, I'm sure.
And the band had any number of interventions, none of which I was. I mean, it was the band. I was, one of the other things that I try to explain to people is that I worked for him. And he trusted me. I would not describe myself as an intimate friend on that level. He was a close friend of my wife's before we married. But which is why he walked her down the aisle at the wedding, because her father had died when she was 4, and her obvious substitute was traveling in somewhere, and he had been our matchmaker, so he was sort of stuck with the job. Although when he came up, she asked, and my wife said to me, I want to ask Jerry to walk me down the aisle, and I said, I said, that's fine, but I'm his employee. I can't do that. That would just be really inappropriate for me to ask him. You have to do that. You, as a friend,
professional lines. Yes.
And he said, fine. And then, but in between the asking and the actual event, he looked at me and said, I don't mind doing this at all, but every wedding that I've ever taken part in never lasted. The marriage never lasted. And I said, well, that's our problem.
Take your chances.
Now it's been 37 years, so I guess he didn't, lasting legacy of Garcia had a almost unique problem. I say almost unique because he was so venerated, so borderline worshipped. He literally on the road, he could not leave his hotel room. So he was isolated. And so the drugs just, took the edge off that isolation. And when he started doing Persian, which was smoking a smokable form of heroin, he did not shoot drugs. It was at a time when he was trying to finish the Grateful Dead movie. In effect, technically, he was not stealing, but he was using Grateful Dead money on a project of his own, and he felt guilty about that. Even though it was about the Grateful Dead, but
Yeah, right on.
There was moral ambivalence there, and he knew it. And there was just this enormous stress. And, of course, one of the aspects, there's a lot of aspects to the 60s counterculture. One of them, or two of them, of the many, two of them were, one, hedonism, and two, a rejection of all conventional societal rules.
Yeah.
If it doesn't hurt anybody else, it's nobody's business. Which was certainly, was going on in the back of Jerry's mind. He was extraordinarily empathic and understood other people, which is one of the reasons why it added up to charisma that made people follow him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, being human, he had a couple of major blind spots. The major one of which was some of his own behaviors, which I thought, as his biographer, it was perfectly obvious where some of his behaviors came from, that I don't think he ever fully... It's not like I was his therapist, but he never fully acknowledged. And at any rate, yes, he used drugs as a coping mechanism. And I have no evidence whatsoever that marijuana or LSD ever had any negative impact on him. In fact, quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Particularly LSD had an incredible stimulus for his creativity, and the band's creativity, the creation of what became almost a group mind at times in improvisational musical performance. So, in that way, the whole template of the Grateful Dead was established during the 2 months when they stopped being in the music band. We're doing the acid tests with Kesey, in which they were not the show. Okay?
Yeah.
The show was everybody in the room doing whatever it was they were doing.
The moment, yeah.
They supplied the soundtrack if they chose to play, and they didn't always play. And that's a unique experience in the music business.
Absolutely.
I mean,
yes, sir.
Jimi Hendrix certainly played on acid many times, but he never was in a place, as they were in the acid tests, in which the audience is not the audience, capital air quotes.
Yes.
But partners, equals.
Yeah, in a collective now.
When you're a performer, when you're a musician and a performer, my father was a Unitarian minister, and he used to refer to being up in the when you give your sermon, you're generally in an elevated, some sort of podium or platform. You're up higher than the rest, or as he put it, 6 feet above contradiction. Okay, that's where sermons come from.
I like that.
And that's the same thing is true with musical performers. They're up higher than the audience.
Yes.
And there is, in most cases, I am the artist, I emote, and you applaud, you respond by applauding, and, I supply something that you would accept.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, in those 2 months, there was a complete not reversal, but alteration of those roles. Everybody at an acid test had to pay to get in. Now, it's also true that at the end of the night, Kesey and the Grateful Dead divvied up that those dollar bills. Right. Jerry put in a dollar bill,
Yeah.
but he got some money back at the end of the night because.
Yeah.
But the point is, so it's the paradigm is not perfect, but they had a fundamental beginning of this sort of unique equals relationship with the audience.
Yes.
And even when they were playing to 60,000 people in Giant Stadium, Jerry still thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I might add, it was one reason why he hated playing stadiums, because as he put it, you have to play to the guy in the last row, which makes the music a cartoon.
Yeah.
And you have to simplify to get
that.
all the way to the last row.
Yes, sir.
And the nuance is impossible. And they did that. I happened to be in the room when they said, this coming summer, because that's, when kids aren't in school, he said, we have to play stadiums. I mean, this was in December of 85.
Okay. Big upgrading to sheds.
They went up and they started. I mean, they had played some stadium gigs, but that's when it became like summers we do stadiums. That's just sort of the nature of the beast.
Yes.
One of the speeches I have to make whenever I'm asked to talk about Jerry is keep in mind that he did not die of a drug overdose. He died of a heart attack.
Yeah.
Because he did not take care of himself physically. There were periodic times in 1992. He lost a lot of weight. He took some time off, and it's very beneficial. But in general, yes, his drug use in particular. The problem in particular was that he had, along with everything else, raging diabetes, which I think led to the heart attack. I know there's doctors have established a connection. And his use of opiates was what permitted him to endure that and to go on. It's not the way I'd recommend,
yes, sir.
But I mean, it had that effect. Jerry emotionally wanted to be Huck Finn on a raft, maybe with a pretty girl and a joint, but in other words, he wanted to, he wanted to resist responsibility.
Yeah.
When in fact, he had 15 people, including me, who expected to be paid every week, and their families all depending on him. And then, in some ways, we're still 1 million deadheads who expected to get their dose of Jerry 80 nights a year in the Grateful Dead and, X number of nights with the Garcia Band. So that instead of, being liberating and being liberated by the Grateful Dead had become, he occasionally talked about it as it wasn't just those 6 guys, it was everybody.
Yeah.
But beside that, he talked about it as a dragon, that it was its own thing. Partly he talked about that because that way he could say, well, that's Grateful Dead, that's not me.
Some distance.
Even though people all thought, well, any band member is, that's Grateful Dead. No, there's this beast flying around the top of the room but the fact of the matter was that he, there was this, weight of responsibility, in addition to the trappings of fame that just, isolated him. In some ways, the coolest thing I ever did for the Grateful Dead was that in 1990, there was a touring Monet exhibit of about 40 paintings, of which there were 8 subjects: a haystack, the famous bridge, the whatever, a flower, and each one had like 5 versions of that haystack. Oh, yeah. Different times of day, different times of year, etc.
Yeah,
it's an amazing show.
Beautiful, yeah.
And I arranged for the band to see this show at the Art Institute of Chicago alone. At 5 o'clock, we got there as the place closed. All we had to do was do a little autograph session for the people who worked there, guards and docents and whoever. The lady who ran the gift shop, in case anybody wanted to buy anything. They were happy to stay an extra hour if they could sort of meet the band, which we're talking about 5 people. So Garcia could go to we snuck in the back door of the museum and the place was empty and we went into the Monet exhibit. Jerry's can stand there and look at these paintings like a human being instead of, you can imagine what would happen if he'd go into the museum alone.
Yes.
I mean, on a regular day. I was proud of that day.
Beautiful. I'm sure he cherished that.
He cherished it, and I'll tell you the punchline to it, which was really funny, which was a month, 2 months later, we were in Europe and we had a day off in Paris. And everybody had been in Paris a number of times, so rather than go running around Paris, I said, "Does anybody want to go to Giverny?" Which I'd never been to, which is Monet's home out 40 miles from Paris. And everybody said, yeah. I said, okay, fine, we're leaving, the bus will leave at 10 o'clock, whatever time it was. And of course, everybody bails. And there's this huge bus, and there's 6 of us. One of whom wasn't even on the tour, was a friend of mine that I just knew everybody knew her and nobody would object.
Yeah.
And David Nelson, who was along the tour because Mariska his wife was working on the tour. And we all got to be partners. That's the kind of way, the Grateful Dead were. The fact that, there's this isolation enforced by fame.
Yeah.
But mostly it was this sense of being responsible for the good times of too many people. And he talked about taking time off, but anytime he would take time off from the Grateful Dead, if he had put his foot down and said, "Look, we have to skip a tour."
Yeah.
He'd have ended up doing Garcia band shows.
Right. It's just something intrinsic to him that just had to be playing kind of drive. Right?
And unfortunately that certainly did not clean up his act, since John Kahn was his partner in addiction, and
yeah,
that didn't help.
Understood. Were psychedelics a part still of his repertoire all throughout, or do you know?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't really answer that question. I mean, I know through well into the 80s, I know that he, periodically did at least some mushrooms or something, just,
Yeah.
But when it stopped, it's not a question I thought to ask.
Sure, understood. Yeah, no, I respect that. And the only reason I ask is, I'm sure you've seen this new wave of psychedelic renaissance fast approaching our culture. It's astounding. I mean, 5 to 8 years ago, it was so taboo still, Yeah,
no, and I'm pleased, at the very least, one of the worst things that ever happened. Well, first there was Leary, who made a farce of psychedelics, with his ego and his Madison Avenue slogans, and it was a very meretricious person.
Understood.
In my opinion, and but And then you get Reagan and, Ronnie and Nancy saying, just say no, which is, stupid. I mean, because it's one thing to try and discourage high school kids from doing drugs, fine, if you want to, but to tell scientists that they can't. There were thousands of experiments, almost all of them indicating positive or neutral results in the 50s about psychedelics and mental health. Whether it was alcoholism, that's what Osmond was up to. Was evaluating combating alcoholism with when he met Huxley.
Yes,
He wrote The Doors of Perception. So, and having that revived now is, clearly, I mean, the tragedy of what's going on. I don't know if you saw it, but the state of North Dakota recently either passed a law or is in the process of passing a law that will put librarians in jail for stocking books on their shelves that challenge conventional notions of gender.
Is that right?
In other words, anything that's pro-LGBTQ or gender fluidity, whatever. And that's like, it's Nazism. I mean, that's and that's basically what the LSD, I believe, is still a Schedule I banned substance, as with heroin. And of course, anybody who's experienced LSD realizes that you can say what you want about it, but addictive. There are people who did a lot of acid.
Yes, sir.
Actually, what they mostly found out was that after about the third day, you couldn't do it.
Doesn't work.
It wasn't working anymore. But I mean, to think of it as addictive is absurd. If somebody finds it addictive, there's something wrong long before they started doing the LSD. It is, which is why, going back to the beginning, Huxley and Humphrey Osmond were discussing. At that time, it was frequently referred to as psychotomimetic, which is to say that LSD when Project MK Ultra was ruling LSD research, the idea was that LSD mimicked psychosis, schizophrenia.
Yes, sir.
And eventually, Osmond said, no. Let's create the word psychedelic, as in mind manifesting. That is simply it opens things up, good and bad, fun and scary, depends.
That's right. The whole spectrum.
But and particularly if you've ever I did hundreds of trips, all told, and the irony about all this, the only negative experience I ever had was on mushrooms at a Rolling Stones concert.
Is that right?
Whether I blame Mick Jagger, but no,
just was a little rough on you, huh?
It was no. I had some things going on in my life, and I just shouldn't have done any drugs that day. But
setting, huh?
But the weirdest manifestation of it was, and it really was odd, was it was at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, and we were underneath an overhang. We had seats, and I was with my gang, and I was in a safe space psychically, and then I suddenly realized that there seemed to be this echo that was new. I mean, like in the middle of the show. Right. Things were starting to reverberate in really weird ways. And then I started going into a bit of a panic attack. And I had to spend the next hour literally walking. I went up on the concourse and walked around in a circle saying, it's not you, it's the drugs. Chill out.
Helpful mantra, yes.
And the old mantra, and I did so for, I don't know, my sense of time was possibly very distorted. I
Sure.
have no idea how long it was. It seemed like forever, of course, but
Yeah.
And then it was funny because just as I suddenly went, "Ooh, I just came down some."
I'm at a Stone show.
And I can still catch the last part of the show. And just as that happened, this volunteer from Rock Med came by and said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "If you happen to have a Valium, I wouldn't mind taking it because that would really take the edge off of things." And they went, "Well, yeah, but you'd have to come down to Rock Med, wherever they were located, which was,
A journey.
a long way from where I was. It's a big stadium.
Yeah.
A doctor has to give it to you." And I went, "I'm not that. I'm down now, and I'm fine. It's okay. Never mind." And I went back in and watched the rest of the show.
You ever find yourself in a precarious drug-related situation? Facing questions that you know not the answers to. You ever think to yourself, I have nowhere to turn for such answers? Strange questions like, are these drugs illegal in this country? Or help with simple math equations like, now did that scale say micrograms or milligrams? Did that last acid trip leave you facing big questions about your place in the physical universe, or wondering if your pet hamster really could see the color of your thoughts? Or the beloved classic, am I too high, man? Am I ever gonna come down?
1-833, I am too high.
That's right. Call now for your opportunity to have your questions read on the air by our team of completely unprofessional, not trained, and likely very stoned drug experts. 1-833, I am too high. Until then, put on some good music, relax, and breathe.
To one of these parties, we went down there. We plugged all our stuff in and played for about a minute, and then we all freaked out. But we made a good impression.
I just had this. I guess you'd call it a panic attack. It's just this spell of depression where suddenly, I was going. Well, that was in '79, in the summer of '79, right? No, '78.
Okay.
I take it back. 81. No, it was 81. It was 81 when the Stones played Candlestick. And I've had one depression in my life, which was literally postpartum depression after my first book, when I didn't know that I could do the second book, the Grateful Dead book. I had this spell of, and it's, as I say, it's just like it happens quite frequently in women after they give birth. Your whole life is wrapped around X.
Yeah.
And suddenly X is born, and of course you're going to have to take care of that X for the next 18 years. Big difference between a book and a baby.
Fair enough.
But in any case, even longer pregnancy than the usual.
Understood.
And there was about 3 months where I was just like, felt, there's a very famous song by Peggy Lee in the 50s. It's a brilliant, brilliant song called "Is That All There Is?" Listen to it. Listen to it. That would sum up the way I felt for those months. 4 or 5 months later, Jerry invited me to be the Grateful Dead's biographer, and I haven't really experienced that.
There you go.
Thank the Lord. I will add that when I finished the Grateful Dead book, when I could see the end of the Grateful Dead book coming, I said, there's one easy way to avoid postpartum depression. Stay pregnant. So I came up with the topic of the next book. I didn't have to have the book going. I just had to have the topic, so I had something to think about.
Yes.
It
worked?
It worked fine. I never noticed. I finished the Grateful Dead book, and
well done.
Started working on the new book. And
yes, sir. Yeah. And so your main books out there that are available for people to read are Desolate Angel, correct? And
Desolate Angel, which you can get them all at Amazon. A Long Strange Trip, and then that third book, which was called On Highway 61, which is sort of the lead up to all the 50s, 60s stuff, from the 1850s to the 1960s.
Wonderful.
Background of it, and then I edited. I didn't write. I edited a book of interviews with Jerry called Jerry on Jerry.
Oh, okay. Very good.
No. It is one of the things that most frustrated me in my entire life was the fact that very, very few people that I could not persuade. This is a big time press.
Yeah.
My Highway 61 book is a small press, and it got very little promotion. And I understood going in that that's the way it was going to be.
Yes, sir.
But the Jerry on Jerry was a major press that simply dropped it. And when I said to them, there's 1 million deadheads, and if you explain to them that the audio version is 7 hours of Jerry telling stories, they're going to want it.
Right.
99% of all deadheads have no clue about this book. To this day.
Yeah.
To this day. Which is a little maddening.
Well, I recommend this. Anybody out there listening to this to check it out. It's highly recommended. Great fun.
He was a great guy to have a conversation with.
Yeah, you're an excellent writer yourself and historian, and I'm really grateful for your time today. Do you have any closing thoughts for folks out there? I mean, kids in the drug world today. It's a different world today than I know when I was coming up and when you were coming up, and I don't know.
Well, it is a different world. I mean, we've seen so much. Some things should be very obvious. It's more dangerous now, in particular because I bought LSD from a stranger once in my life, and it was a dyed aspirin, I think. Nothing happened. So I got off lucky.
That was the worst case back then, too, honestly.
That was my worst, and that's generally the worst case.
Yeah.
I got taken for $3. Oh heavens!
Right.
Anything you buy that you don't know the provenance of, in this day and age, is likely to have fentanyl and could kill you.
Yes, sir.
And then that's not hysterical parent exaggeration. That's fact.
Yep.
I live in San Francisco. I watch this shit all day long on 5 blocks from my house.
Yeah, man.
I'd also be careful about smoking too much of some of the weed that's made now because it's so goddamn strong.
Right.
Take your head off. You'll leave the planet.
You heard it here, kids.
Yeah, Jesus. I remember when I first started seeing what we call then Cincinnati and how, and the irony is all that stuff came out of UC Davis, which is 50 miles from San Francisco, and is a world-class agricultural school. And the Department of Botany there is where they started growing pot, graduate students there at home, obviously, to developing, more pot. It was the first time anybody had applied the principles of Gregor Mendel and botany and genetics to increasing the strength. People have been getting high, as you well know, for all eternity.
Dawn of time,
so as long as there have been people. But this was the first time anybody ever systematically worked on making it more efficient in terms of getting you higher, or at least more instantly high.
Right.
Which is why I'm not a young person. I mean, 2 hits and I'm comatose. That's, in this day and age.
Right.
Whereas we rolled 4 joints to go see Apocalypse Now. That's the mediocrity of the drugs that I was buying at the time.
I see.
To say basic California, dope, pot. Nothing scary about it. I mean, you might glom out of the ice cream as you're on your way out. Other than that, it's about the biggest danger. Now, as I say, I mean, 2 hits and I'm quite stoned. Thank you.
Yeah, and more is not always better in that realm,
No, it's not. Well, in my case, the point is it would just either A, give me the raging munchies, which I don't need any help with my appetite, and or B, I'd be asleep 10 minutes later, and I don't need that for sleeping either.
No good to anybody, right?
Just useless. So so yeah, that's like I say, if you want to talk about where everything went wrong with psychedelics, you start with Leary and turning it into a circus, and then the Reagans and shutting, and imposing censorship, and the CIA, which of course controlled it, thinking it could use it as a weapon, which it's not for everyone by any means.
Yeah.
But I think it is a positive event in human history.
Indeed.
And I'm very glad of my experiences with it. And 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 I think, to quote Jerry, where does it say that we can't alter our consciousness?
Yeah. It's not in the Bible.
In what book or what what right. Bible or whatever?
Did you ever sample any of Owsley's product? I'm assuming you did.
No.
Okay.
No, he kept 5 times at least. He said, "Well, I was rooting around in my bag and came up with some of the old stuff." It's like, yeah, right. As though I had to assume that he was. He made jewelry and rather pretty jewelry, but I personally assumed, and it was nothing but an assumption, that he continued. At any rate, and I'd say sure, and then he never got around to giving it. So I never did.
The reason
I never did. I was dosed once backstage, by whom I don't know. And
gotcha.
Made a startling discovery which nobody had ever talked about, and I've read about it once or twice since, but which is that niacin instantly neutralizes LSD.
Really?
Are you aware of this?
I'm not aware of that. No. That's quite a factoid.
Let me give you the lesson for the day.
Please.
I was dosed and I was really high. I wasn't like freaking or scared, but again, it took my legs from under me, so I was just sort of sitting in the corner like a puddle.
And you were working.
And Ramrod, who was the Grateful Dead's crew chief and had been a prankster and knew what he was talking about and was the most trustworthy person on the planet, walked by, and I said, "Hey, Ramrod, I'm not like freaking, but I'm useless." And he said, "Oh, come with me." And we go back to the catering area, and there was a road. The catering guys had a road case full of vitamins, and he hauls out some niacin, and he gives me, I don't know how many milligrams of niacin, 3 or 4 pills. Niacin is vitamin B1, is another version of B1.
Yes, sir.
And I took them, and B1 will make you flush. Literally, your face will get red for a minute.
Yeah. So
if you're tripping your socks off, it's an odd sensation because you sort of feel like you're gently boiling in oil, and just like. And about 5 minutes after I took the pills, I suddenly came down by 80%.
How about
just like that?
Now that is a helpful tip.
It is a helpful tip, and no one, and
I'm surprised.
they were giving out Thorazine, all the hospitals on the planet. It could have been replaced by one big bottle of niacin.
How about that?
It makes me crazy. That's one of those things that the lack of research caused by the Reagans engendered.
There must be some pharmaceutical collusion in there too, I imagine.
I have, that you'd have to ask somebody who knows more than I do. But I will tell you from personal experience, work like a charm. There's no possible negative, consequence.
Yes.
That I could, having niacin is, it's like a vitamin.
Thank you for that. That is really, for harm reduction,
You're welcome.
really helpful.
Share that with the world. Everybody should know about that. Everybody who thinks they're planning on doing. I spent a year where I had 2 or 3 in a little plastic envelope in my wallet, just in case.
Just in case, right? Yeah.
Never had to use it again, but yeah.
That's fantastic.
There you go.
Thank you, Dennis.
There you go.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Well, there we have it. Dennis McNally. Excellent conversation. And hey, all y'all who would be more interested in Dennis's work, check out his writings. We have Desolate Angel, Jack Kerouac, The Beat Generation, and America was his first book. A Long Strange Trip, The Inside History of the Grateful Dead. And Dennis was the editor on a wonderful audio recording, basically a collection of conversations with Jerry Garcia called Jerry on Jerry. And that's available compact disc and DVD. See y'all next time. Let's change our minds.
Show me prison, show me jail, show me a prison man whose face is growing pale, and I'll show you a young man with many reasons why, and there but for fortune may go you or I.